Tonight we're going to talk about victory songs in the Bible. Now, you might think that's kind of an odd subject, but there are 8 specifically called victory songs in the Bible. And they tell us a great deal, I think, about what we will experience as Jesus Christ returns, and we're able to sing the final 2 victory songs that are given to us in the book of Revelation. Now, some of them are very long, but I want to look at one of the longer ones to begin with, because I think this victory song kind of outlines what is in most of the victory songs. And that is the victory song of Deborah and Barak. And it is contained for us over in Judges chapter 5. So if you'll turn over to Judges chapter 5, now the book of Judges isn't all that long. It does cover a huge part of Israel's history, about 340 years, I believe, or something in that neighborhood. But it's only about 20 chapters. It's fairly short. So we have 21 chapters. So we have an entire chapter in this book, this historical book. All of chapter 5 is nothing more than the victory song of Deborah and Barak. And as you remember the story, the whole bunches of tribes, Ishmaelites and others, which they said numbered well over 100,000. That's kind of what the estimates are, but it's very, very large number of army that was arrayed against them. And then, of course, there's a prophecy from Deborah, who was a prophetess, that Sisera and the army, of course, would defeat. Even though the Israelites did not have any weapons, they simply had to march as an unarmed army against this huge army of Sisera. And also he had 900 chariots, so it would have been a formidable army coming at them, over 100,000 soldiers. And it's a story kind of, as many of them are, to illustrate that God's deliverance is our only hope, that mankind preparing physically and trying to outwit our spiritual enemies, or in some cases our physical enemies, it doesn't work without God's help. Now, also at the very end of it, we have a woman named Jael, and she was Heber's wife. And she's famous because she took a nail and pounded it into Sisera's head when he was hiding in her tent. And of course, then she is extolled and praised as being a woman of valor who destroyed the head of the enemy army, and just added that much more to the defeat. So you can read the story in chapters 3 and 4, but in chapter 5 now, that's what I want to concentrate on. We have verse 1, then sang Deborah and Barak, the son of Ahinoam, on that day. So we have this song of praise, or song of thanksgiving. And this one, I want to read you kind of the outline of it first before we read it, because the outline is also the outline of others of these 8 victory songs in the Bible. And it does tell us, I think, some very important information about how God delivers and what our future may hold. Number 1, the first purpose is to thank God for their recent victory over the Canaanites and for his deliverance of Israel after 20 years of being oppressed and defeated by their enemies. Number 2, to celebrate the zeal and bravery of the rulers and the people of certain tribes who had faith in God and volunteered their services. Not all the tribes volunteered to send men unarmed against this enemy army, but certain of them did, and so they were extolled because of that. Number 3, to rebuke the unbelief of certain tribes who stayed home, betraying the public cause of the people. So there's a little bit of correction in here for a few of the tribes of Israel, because they did not have enough courage to fight. Even though they knew that they couldn't win physically, God had to supernaturally deliver them. And just as in the end time, there will be some people who will lack faith, who will lack strength, and will also maybe follow in the same sort of path. Number 4, to honor God for his supernatural part in the uneven struggle. And so we are also wrestling against the spiritual powers in high places. So we have an uneven struggle. But the purpose here, number 4, is to honor God for his supernatural part. Number 5, to curse those who refuse to take part in the battle. Number 6, to bless the woman who was bold enough to slay Sisera, who was the enemy king. Number 7, to show the disappointment and anguish of the mother of Sisera. It's kind of an allegorical song about how the mother of Sisera was disappointed because her son did not come home from battle. And it's illustrated to prove that God was behind the death of Sisera, wanted him dead, and certainly it just would show that the Israelites were celebrating their victory over these people who had oppressed them for over 20 years. Number 8, to pronounce a blessing upon the people of God and a curse upon their enemies. Almost all of the victory psalms are sort of in this same line, showing that God blessed his people and that the enemies, those who were trying to defeat or enslave them, were now defeated. So we have all these kind of points, you might say, that tend to come out in each one of these 8 songs of praise. Not all of them, of course, do. Now, tonight, by the way, we are not going to go to the book of Psalms. There are some of these repeated in the book of Psalms as a psalm, but primarily so there's enough victory songs in the Psalms, and many of them are set in an end time setting. So we're just going to talk tonight about the ones that are historical and that we can look at aside from the book of Psalms, just because of time. Okay, let's look at Judges chapter 5 and verse 1. Then sang Deborah and Barak the son of Ahinoam on that day, saying, "Praise you the Lord for the avenging of Israel, when the people willingly offered themselves." So this is kind of a historical reflection. The people of Israel willingly offered themselves, even though they didn't have arms, they did not have swords or shields, but they simply came out and said, if God will lead us, then we will go into battle. He says, "Hear you kings, give ear, O you princes. Even I will sing unto the Lord. I will sing praise to the Lord God of Israel." And so the SPS of this psalm, or of this song, victory song, is to sing praise to the God of Israel for what he has done. And that's the same when we sing the Song of Moses, when the resurrected saints sing the Song of Moses back in Revelation. It's the same theme. Verse 4, "Lord, when you went out of Seir," that would be out of basically where Petra is, the rugged kind of reddish brown mountains down to the east and the southeast of Jerusalem. He says, "When you went out of Seir, when you marched out of the field of Edom, the earth trembled, and the heavens dropped, and clouds also dropped water." So this is a description, apparently, of how God fought the battle. He may have fought it with a tremendous downpour of rain to begin with. That would have then turned very quickly into mud. Petra is famous for flash floods, sometimes flash floods that are fatal. And even in the area of Jordan, a few years ago, there were some flash floods that not only drowned some people, but caused a lot of havoc on the roads as the rivers, wadis, rose very quickly. So when you went out of Seir, so apparently the direction that God's deliverance came from may have been from the direction of Seir, or the direction of the area we know where Petra is. Verse 5, as the heavens dropped and clouds dropped water. So one thing that God must have done was to get a victory because of the rain that had fallen, apparently in surrounding or flooding the enemy. Verse 5, "The mountains melted from before the Lord, even at Sinai from before the Lord of God of Israel." So in other words, the mountains were as nothing. God's curses on his fighting in the battle went right down very quickly. The mountain didn't stop him. Perhaps he's also talking about the clouds swirling around to where the mountains could not be seen. And of course, because of all the water, then the mountains wouldn't have been seen. Let's drop down a little bit farther to verse 6. "In the days of Shamgar, the son of Anath, in the days of Jael, the highways were unoccupied, and the travelers walked through the byways." So here he's kind of going back and thinking about historically what had happened. Earlier in the days of Jael, things were fine, things were calm, things were at peace, and travelers walked through the byways. These were the same byways that the enemy army would have been on. "The inhabitants of the villagers ceased in Israel, until that Deborah arose, and I arose a mother in Israel." So now it turns to a first-person story, an account from Deborah. And she, of course, was the prophetess. She did not lead the army. Barak did that. But she did here recount how the inhabitants of the villages ceased. In other words, they were in fear, they were in terror, they were pretty much either enslaved or simply unable to function normally because of the Ishmaelites. It says, "They chose new gods. Then was war in the gates. There was shield or spear seen among the 40,000 in Israel." So she's saying there was no blacksmith, there were no shields, there were no swords in the area of Israel. Commentary says, "Israel forsook God for new gods that could not deliver them. Then when they went after other gods, there was war in their gates, and they were totally unarmed by their enemies." And so that's true. The enemies would always take all the metalsmiths into a different country, a different place, so these subjugated countries could not forge any weapons of war. It says this was their sole cause of their calamities as a nation, because when they served God, they were at peace, and when they were prosperous, when they were law-abiding. I think that's true even today. Nations that are law-abiding are also prosperous, and as we live in a land that is less and less law-abiding, prosperity will be simply a memory, a thing of the past. Okay, let's look at verse 9. My heart is toward the governors of Israel that offered themselves willingly among the people. Bless you, the Lord. So there were people who did willingly offer to help, to send soldiers, even though they were unarmed, to fight with the enemy. And so she said her heart was moved towards them. Speak, you that ride on white asses, you that sit in judgment and walk by the way. Now, what that means is sometimes rich people or the rulers, the governors of the land, would take white donkeys. Apparently, they were kind of a highly prized animal to ride upon. And they would ride around town, basically showing off about how important they were or how much physical assets they had. But basically, it was the ruling class or the rulers that did that. So she says, speak to the rulers that sit in judgment and walk by the way, they that are delivered from the noise of archers in the place of drawing water. In other words, that's, of course, the well, the place of drawing water. So we have the kind of an admonition from her that they were delivered not by their own actions, but by God's. They that are delivered from the noise of archers in the places of drawing water, there shall they rehearse the righteous acts of the Lord, even the righteous acts towards the inhabitants of his villages in Israel. Then shall the people of the Lord go down to the gates. So when they remind each other of the righteous acts of God, and that is what's on their mind, then it says they'll go down in peace to their houses and their gates. Verse 12, awake, awake, Deborah, awake, awake, utter a song. Arise, Barak, and lead thy captivity, captive, you son of Ahinoam. So she's rehearsing how she sort of got Barak to get awake and go out and lead the army like he was supposed to. So he was asleep on the job. He wasn't leading as he was supposed to. So Deborah, the prophetess, woke him up and said, get out there and lead the army. That he made that remains have dominion over the nobles among the people, and the Lord made me have dominion over the mighty. So what she's saying is the lowly of the land then began to have dominion over those who were noble. And here she was a lady, and she had dominion over the mighty people of Israel. Verse 14, out of Ephraim, there was a root of them against Amalek. So this is the 10 tribes referred to. Of course, this is the tribe of Ephraim. There was a root of them, or some that came out and attacked Amalek. And of course, the Amalekites were aligned with the Ishmaelites in this particular battle. And thee, Benjamin, among your people, out of Mashur came down governors, out of Zebulun, they that handle the pen of the water. And the princes of Issachar were with Deborah, even Issachar and also Barak, was sent on foot into the valley. For the divisions of Reuben were there, great thoughts of heart. So she's complimenting the tribes of Israel who sent soldiers into this battle that physically they simply could not win. And that's kind of the way God does things sometimes. He makes sure that if there's any success, he gets the credit because man can't claim it. The Apostle Paul mentioned that several times about he couldn't do God's work. He talked about being in despair, and it's only through God's help that he was able to accomplish the things he was given to do. So here we have the same principle. Verse 16, why abode you among the sheepfolds to hear the beatings of the flocks? For the divisions of Reuben, there were great searchings of heart. So here we have the two tribes mentioned again here as being the ones from which most of the 10,000 men came who fought the Canaanites. And so she's again, giving a blessing to Reuben, and because they sent so many army soldiers. Gilead abode beyond Jordan, and did Dan remain in, or why did Dan remain in ships? Asher continued on the seashore, and there abode in his breaches. So she's making kind of questions about why these other tribes did not fight, why they were basically either cowardice or simply staying in their homes. They didn't have enough faith to go fight as God told them to. Verse 18, Zebulun and Naphtali were people that jeopardized their lives unto death in the high places of the field. So these two tribes are mentioned here as being courageous, being valorous tribes. And they went into battle and risked their lives nigh unto death. The kings came and fought. Then fought the kings of Canaan in Tanakh by the waters of Megiddo, and they took no gain of money. So this suggests that these kings who came to Israel hoping to take booty, hoping to conquer cities and steal all the gold and silver and other things they could, came home with nothing. Then she begins to, in verse 20, give real credit to where it should go. They fought from heaven. Now, they in this case is the angels of heaven, and she considers them as the stars in their courses, fought against Sisera. So she knew that the real army of God was there and came down from heaven. This is kind of one of many scriptures teaching us that wars are lost oftentimes or won by supernatural means, that God himself rewards the victory. Verse 21, the river of Kishon swept them away. Now this verse, along with verse 20, suggests that one way the stars fought from heaven was by a huge downpour that caused a multitude of water in the riverbeds where the armies were. And of course, then they're not able to hardly walk. Their chariots get bogged down in mud. And if they have heavy armor on, it makes it very, very difficult to walk. Verse 22, then were the horse hooves broken by the means of the pransings. And that's one of those words in the Bible that, what is a pransing? Anybody have a collection of pransings at home? No. Anybody know what a pransing is? Probably not. But it's translated other ways in other places. Basically, it means they were running and the hooves, they were prancing or hitting very hard on the rocks. And since they didn't have shoes on their horses like we have today, their hooves eventually split. So what she's saying is the enemy soldiers on horseback have retreated so fast and were in such terror that they overdid their horses, and the horses' hoofs then broke on the rocks. Verse 23, curse you, Menaz, the angel of the Lord. Now, Menaz is a town that no one knows today where it was, but it was a town apparently where the enemy, they sent a town of the enemy, and where they sent soldiers, or who knows exactly what. Maybe they gave food and water and supplies to the enemy soldiers, hoping to have some reward after Israel was supposedly going to be defeated. It says, curse you bitterly, the inhabitants thereof, because they came not out to help of the Lord. And the help of the Lord was the help of the Lord against the mighty. So they tried to fight against what God was doing. Verse 24, blessed above women shall Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, be. So she did one act that's recorded in history, and for that she shall always be remembered, always be, let's just say, a little bit famous. Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, blessed shall she be above women in the tent. So Jael had to live in the shadow of his famous wife. There are some of us in this life that understand that very well, but it's just not something to be worried about. If God blesses them, then we should be very thankful for that and for their success. But certainly she was very successful in humiliating the Ishmaelites and killing Sisera, and then, of course, making sure the enemy of Israel had been removed. Verse 25, he asked water, and she gave him milk. She brought forth butter in a lordly dish, which means he came into the tent, and she told him he could be safe there, and she brought him some sort of a buttermilk or something to drink. She put her hand in the nail and her right hand to the workman's hammer. With the hammer smote Sisera. She smote off his head. That's after she knocked him out with the nail. And she smote off his head, just like King David cut off the head of Goliath after he had whacked him in the head with a rock. So the rock probably didn't kill him, just knocked him out, and then David was able to take off his head with the enemy's sword. So she had pierced and stricken his temples. 27, at her feet he bowed, he fell, he lay down, and at her feet he bowed, he fell where he bowed, and there he fell down dead. So there's this kind of allegorical song celebrating the death of the enemy who had organized this massive army. His desire was to kill people in Israel, take their possessions, take their women into slavery, and what he had planned turned against him. Verse 28, the mother, this is an allegorical story. Now, we don't know if it happened or not. It could just be one of those allegorical stories in a similar vein to, God sent great arrows out of the sky, or other sort of allegorical things like the mountains jumped and leaped, which it talks about as a type of when Israel came out of Egypt. So this may be simply allegorical. They're saying the mother of Sisera looked out a window and cried through the lattice, why is his chariot so long in coming? Why tarry the wheels of his chariots? And it's true that women, especially in older times, would wait for the return of their of their husbands or the soldiers that were fighting. And so it's very likely that something like this happened. Her wise ladies answered her, yes. She returned to answer herself. And of course, the wife of Sisera would have been living in, relative luxury for that time. She would have been living in a palace. She would have been a king's wife, so to speak, or king's mother. Verse 30, have they not sped? Have they not divided the prey, to every man a damsel or two, to Sisera a prey of different colors of needlework, and different colors of needlework on both sides? So what this mother is saying, haven't they speedily achieved victory? Haven't they taken all of the unmarried young ladies as slaves, either to be sold or to be assimilated into the nation, as men would take several wives when they went to war? So the mother is saying, hasn't this all happened? Aren't they coming back with a booty of victory? Verse 31, so let all the enemies perish. O Lord, let them that love him be as the sun when he goes down in his might. And the Lord and the land had rest for 40 years. So the last sentence, the land had rest 40 years, probably was not part of the victory song. But the other part of it was, it ends with, let them that love him be as the sun when he goes forth in his might. So all the enemies of God perish, but those that love God would be like the sun shining. And that, of course, is also given as a prophetic description of the way things can be after Christ returns, people that shine like the sun. So that song of praise in the scripture is certainly not the first one, but it does tell us something about God's supernatural deliverance and the dependence upon those that he delivers on him completely. It's like the people of Israel had no chance to defeat the king of Egypt. Well, let's go back to the Song of Moses in Exodus chapter 15. This will be our second one we look at. The Song of Moses, there's a little controversy as what is the Song of Moses that is sung by the people who are delivered in the book of Revelation. It says they sing the Song of Moses, and that I think is Revelation 15. Well, there are three different parts of Scripture that are considered to be the Song of Moses. Two, very carefully, are Exodus 15, although this might be called the Song of Miriam because she's the one that sang it and danced it. There's also in the book of Exodus a song or in Deuteronomy, a song that Moses composed to remind the people of Israel as to what their history would be and how they needed to obey God and not get involved in idolatry. And we'll look at that one in a few minutes. But first, Exodus chapter 15, we'll begin in verse 1. This is called the Song of Moses, and most of your Bibles will reference Revelation 15 and verse 3, where it says they sang the Song of Moses. And this very well may be a very similar or parallel song to what is going to be sung by those who are delivered from the Great Tribulation and all the plagues and the great problems that are soon to come upon us. Verse 1, then sang Moses and the children of Israel this song unto the Lord, and spoke, saying, I will sing unto the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. The horse and his rider, meaning the horseman of Pharaoh, has he thrown into the sea. So Moses is celebrating that God had delivered Israel from Pharaoh and all his hosts. Then he has a verse that is quoted a number of times in here. It is the first time. The Lord is my strength and song. He has become my salvation. So God was his source of strength. God was his song. He sang about a song of praise here. And he has become my salvation. He is the source of being saved. He is my God. I will prepare him a habitation. My father's God, I will exalt him. Now, preparing for him a habitation could have been referring possibly to Moses later building a tabernacle. That would be a habitation for the one that was there in the fiery pillar of fire by day or by night and smoke by day. Or he could have been speaking of a tabernacle later to be built, maybe the one on Mount Sinai. Maybe he's talking about the temple. It was in his mind, or somebody he knew would later build a great temple to God at Jerusalem. On a spiritual sense, we are now all a part of God's building. Ephesians chapter 2, we know that very well. Verse 20, that the foundation of the prophets and the apostles, and Jesus Christ here being a chief cornerstone, but it is being built as a fitting habitation for God. So where he says, I will prepare him an habitation as an application to the New Testament church, to those who God has called, it would be a matter of heart, a matter of making a place for God to live in our heart inside us. says, my father's God, and I will exalt him. The Lord is a man of war. The Lord is his name. Now, people today try to think that Jesus Christ, or that God, is only a God of mercy and kindness and love and forgiveness and warm feelings and fuzziness. And truly, God is a man of war. And when Jesus Christ returns to punish this earth for all of its evil, and especially to exact upon the people of Israel the terms of their covenant when they break it, God will be a man of war, and the Lord is his name. So he is a man of war, a person of war, and he was the hero of this battle, when the battle with Egypt. He's also the hero of the spiritual war that we fight. Verse 4, Pharaoh's chariots and his host he has cast into the sea. His chosen captains also are drowned in the sea. The depths have covered them. They sank to the bottom as a stone. Your right hand, O Lord, has become glorious in power. Your right hand, O Lord, has dashed in pieces the enemy. And so we have this, just kind of rehearsal of what had happened in this song. But down in verse 8, we have, again, allegorical descriptions of how the battle is described, anyway, by Moses. With the blast of your nostrils, the waters were gathered together, the flood stood upright as a heap, and the depths were congealed in the heart of the earth. So it was like a blast from God's mouth, or his nostrils, what Moses is saying here. Verse 9, the enemy said, I will pursue, I will overtake, I will divide the spoil. My lust shall be satisfied upon you. I will draw my sword, and my hand shall destroy them. So this is kind of a description of Satan, the devil. He's seeking, a roaring lion, seeking whom he can devour. He's pursuing, he plans to overtake, he plans to divide the spoil. And so Pharaoh's mindset at this point was very much the same as Satan, the devil. Verse 10, you did blow with your wind, the sea covered them. That's because the wind blew all night to divide the waters apart and to drive in the seabed, so it would make a proper road, or at least a firm road, for the people of Israel to walk over on. Verse 11, who is like you, O Lord, among the gods? Who is there like you, glorious in holiness, fearful in praises, and doing wonders? The answer, of course, is no one. It's simply a way of saying that there's no one like God. There's no one that is anywhere near able to do what he's able to do. You stretched out your right hand, the earth swallowed them. So Moses didn't see the right hand of God. He simply knew that the waters came back. Moses may have, if you've seen the movie, The Ten Commandments, but Moses raises his arms up, the waters come back. We're not quite sure exactly how that took place, but at any rate, it perhaps was symbolic of God's right hand. You in your mercy led them forth, the people which you have redeemed. You have guided them in your strength into your holy habitation. So a lot of spiritual parallels there, that God guides his people into holy to live. The people shall hear and be afraid. Sorrow shall take a hold of the inhabitants of Palestina, or in this case, promised land. So we have a prophecy, or at least a foretelling by Moses, that in the land that they are going to occupy are going to be terrified, going to be afraid. He says, the dukes of Edom shall be amazed, the mighty men of Moab shall take down upon them, and all the inhabitants of Canaan shall melt away. So he's prophesying about how the people of Israel then would take over the land that God had promised them. Verse 17, you shall bring them in and plant them in the mountain of your inheritance, in the place, O Lord, which you have made for you to dwell in the sanctuary. The Lord God shall forever and ever. Verse 18. Now we have verse 19, the horse of Pharaoh went in, and his chariots, they were. So verse 20, Miriam the prophetess, the sister of Aaron, took a timbrel in her hand, and she went out to dance with the dancers. So this is kind of like another victory song, or another victory dance here for the people of Israel. But this is the victory song of Miriam. And she just singing, Moses brought Israel from the Red Sea, and they went out to the wilderness. And she has, kind of a dance here where she's probably singing some of the songs. She answered them, said, sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. The horse and his rider has he thrown into the sea. We don't have all of her words. Perhaps she simply rehearsed. Song of Israel in Numbers chapter 21. Numbers chapter 21, beginning in verse 17. Now this is... they'd taken their journey from the Red Sea to Pisgah. This is after they had been, one of the many sad events in the book of Numbers, where they had this plague of fiery serpent aimed against Moses. Moses set up this brazen serpent to try to, basically they had to look at him and the serpent, this brazen thing he made, which is found much, much later, hundreds and hundreds of years later. I think it's the book of 2 Kings they find it. But at any rate, we have this really the 43rd miracle in the history of Israel here. And verse 8, the Lord said to Moses, make a fiery serpent. And of course, when he did, that the snakes, the serpents that were biting the people of Israel then stopped. Whoever beheld the serpent of brass, he lived. So verse 10, the children of Israel set forth and pitched in Rehoboth or Oboth. So they made them place a new place to dwell and to think about what had happened and their sin, and of course what had happened to them. They went, verse 16, they went from there to Beer, that is the well where the Lord spoke unto Moses. So a place, Beersheba, or the land of Beer, was where this was. Not beer as a drink, but as a location called Beer. Verse 17, that Israel sang this song, spring up, O well, sing you to it. The princes dug a well, the nobles of the people digged it. By the direction of the lawgiver, by their staves, and they went to the wilderness, they went to Matana. And he gives some names here. So Israel here gives messengers about, or at least a message, a song about celebrating the fact that they had water, that they had peace, and that they had water. So in this case, it's not a victory over other people. It's basically a victory over thirst, a victory over being dry. So they sang this song, spring up, O well, and sing you to it. So I suppose people that are in a parched state, who are very tired and dry, be able to find a well, something certainly to celebrate. Now let's go over to the Song of Moses, number 2, Deuteronomy 32. I don't quite have time to read all of this chapter, but Deuteronomy 32 is very prophetic. He kind of gives a historical outline of what will befall the people of Israel all the way until the return of Jesus Christ. This is really a profound chapter because it shows that God had talked to Moses and told him the future, what was going to happen. Who knows if he told him it was going to be thousands of years later, but certainly there's just a lot here that hasn't taken place yet. This is not a celebration of what has been as much as it is a discourse about what's going to be, and eventually a celebration of how God will finally deliver Israel. So chapter 32 is pretty much a study on its own. The headline on the chapter is Song of Moses. Give ear, O you heavens, and I will speak. Give ear, O earth, the words of my mouth. So he's simply saying, listen to what I'm going to say, and listen to the things that are going to be happening. Verse 2, my doctrine shall drop as the rain, my speech shall distill as the dew, as the small rain upon the tender herb, as the showers upon the grass. In other words, listen to what I have to say. My doctrine, or my teaching here, my instructions, as one translation, are going to be like showers upon the grass. In other words, they will grow and they will produce fruit. Because I will publish the name of the Lord, ascribe you greatness unto our God. He is the rock, his work is perfect, for all his ways are judgment, a God of truth and without iniquity, just and right is he. So we don't know what tune it was. We don't know what song it was, how it sounded. Who knows what scales they had or what instruments they had. There's a lot of guesses and surmisings, but we don't have any recordings. So that's a lot different. Verse 5, they have corrupted themselves. Their spot is not the spot of his children. They are a perverse and crooked generation. So Moses here says that people of Israel are by nature going to become corrupted. They've corrupted themselves. Their spot is not the identifying spot of being God's children. It's something else. Verse 6, do you thus requite the Lord? Do you repay God, O foolish people and unwise? We could say that today. Is our nation repaying God for all the blessings he's given to us? And of course, the answer is no. They're, as a whole, turning against God. Is not he that your father has brought you? And it's not, he made you and established you. Of course, he did. He made their nation. He established them. He brought them out of Egypt. Verse 7, remember the days of old. Consider the years of many generations. Ask your father, and he will show you. Your elders, and they will tell you. So ask the older people to tell you the history of how God delivered the people of Israel, and you'll learn some lessons from that. He's hearkening back now to something that's going to be in the future. When the Most High, verse 8, when the Most High divided the nations their inheritance, when he separated the sons of Adam, he's going back now to the time after the flood, he set the bounds of the people according to the number of the children of Israel. So God allotted certain lands for people to live, but he allotted the land for Israel first, and all other nations had to take a place after them. The commentary here in Dake says, when God divided the nations their inheritance and set boundaries around their lands that they should not mingle, he reserves the pronouncement of the promised land for Israel as his own portion, because he would come there and live in their midst forever. It says the original division of the earth was made with the three sons of Noah about 200 to 300 years before Abraham. So that's what this commentary believes this is referring to. But it's also referring to Israel being established in the promised land, in the sections of land for each tribe, because God did set those bounds, those people, according to their tribes in Israel also. For the Lord's portion is his people. Jacob is the lot of his inheritance. So God's inheritance is the place where the sons of Jacob then would be living. He found him in a desert land and in the waste howling wilderness. He fed him about, he instructed him, and he kept him as the apple of his eye. And so God did stay with Jacob, who became Israel, and with his sons, as that rock symbolized that God would be there for protection. As an eagle stirs up her nest, flutters over her young, spreads abroad her wings, takes them and bears them on our wings. So the Lord alone did lead them, and there was no strange God with them. The Bible makes several references to eagle's wings, and this is one of the earlier ones. As an eagle stirs up her nest and flutters over her young. God says that's how he is dealing with Israel. Verse 13, he made him ride on the high places of the earth, that he might eat the increase of his fields. He made him to eat honey out of the rock and oil out of the flinty rock. So took a land that was not as productive as it was going to be and really blessed it. Verse 15, but Jeshurun, another name for Jacob or Israel, waxed fat and kicked. You are waxen fat, you are grown thick, you are covered with fatness. So he's just saying that the people, spiritually speaking, became self-assured. They became perhaps a little bit pleasure-oriented, hedonistic, what they call in the times in which we live here, a time basically of largesse and no laws, kind of lawlessness. It says he forsook God, which made him, and lightly esteemed the rock of his salvation. So in the future, he's showing this is what would happen to Israel. It happened a number of times. It is certainly repeating in our time. People esteem lightly the rock of our salvation. They provoked him to jealousy with strange gods. And of course, that happened a number of times. This actually is about a list of about 7 sins of Israel, but oftentimes false gods were brought into the land or were worshipped. They sacrificed unto devils, not to God, to gods whom they knew not, and to new gods that came newly up, whom your fathers feared not. So they had new gods they concocted. They adopted the gods of the land. They worshipped on what was called high places. The reason they were called high places because they were mountaintops or hilltops where they could worship the sun as it came up in the morning. And so they were basically Baals or sun-worshiping type of idols. And so the high places were where they could then look and see the sun coming up in the east and worship it as it did so every day. So they provoked God to jealousy. Verse 18, of the rock that begat you, you are unmindful and have forgotten God that formed you. So keep in mind, this is given right as the Israelites are about to see Moses die, and then they are going to go into the promised land. So he's warning them that they, in the future, are going to forget God. And when the Lord saw it, he abhorred them because of the provoking of his sons. He said, I will hide my face from them. I will see that they're in what their end shall be, for they are a very froward generation, children in whom is no faith. So this is all told ahead of time. They have moved me to jealousy with that which is not God. They have provoked me to anger with their vanities. I will move them to jealousy with those who are not a people. I'll provoke them to anger with a foolish nation. In other words, he would use a foreign country to come in and punish them for their sins. A fire is kindled in mine anger, and shall burn to the lowest depths of the grave, and shall consume the earth with her increase, and set on fire the fountains of the mountains. And so we have just kind of summarize some of the rest of the chapter. God's going to heap mischiefs upon them. They'll be burnt with hunger, with feet, with bitter destruction. God will send beasts and poison serpents among them. A lot of this is very similar to Leviticus 26 and the cursings that will come upon Israel for disobeying God. And that's just a different way of putting the same thing. The sword without, the terror within. So again, terror or fear overcoming the people of Israel. We've seen a lot of that this past year. Shall destroy both the young man and the virgin, the suckling also, and the man of gray hairs. It could be the man of few gray hairs, might fit a few more of us, but certainly even the people of older age who shouldn't be afraid of much, it says they will also be afraid. I said I would scatter them into corners. In other words, the four corners of the earth. The Israelites would be scattered all over the earth. I will make the remembrance of them to cease from among men. So except for the tribe of Judah, the people of Israel have lost their identity. They don't remember who they were. And so we have their remembrance lost, even though the blessings of Abraham have been visited upon them this last 250 years, and they're rapidly disappearing. So they are scattered among nations, and they simply have forgotten who they are. Let's drop down in verse 30. How should one chase 1,000 and put 10,000 in flight, except their rock had sold them, and the Lord had shut them up? For their rock is not as our rock, even our enemies themselves being judges. So here we are at the very end of this song now, extolling God and what he would do to deliver them, and how he would deliver them and return them. Verse 36, the Lord shall judge his people and repent himself for service. In other words, he'll bring back from captivity those who have been punished. When he sees that their power is gone and there is none shut up or left. So when they are scattered, when they're defeated, when they are punished, then God will move to reestablish them. He shall say, where are their gods, their rock in whom they trusted? So he's going to say, why have them realize that their false gods did not save them? Verse 42, I'll make my arrows drunk with blood, and my sword shall devour flesh. And with that with the blood of the slain of the captives, from beginning of vengeance upon the enemy. So God is now going to turn his vengeance upon the enemy, not upon the people of Israel. So verse 43, rejoice, all you nations, with his people, for he will avenge the blood of his servants. I kind of remind you of that prayer in Revelation 6. It says the blood of the servants say, how much longer, God, before you avenge our blood among those? And the answer is, stay in your graves a little while longer until others are punished or lose their life, give up their life, even as you did. Verse 43, it just says that Moses came, verse 44, and spoke all the words of this song in the ears of the people, he and Hoshea, the son of Nun. And Moses made an end of speaking all these words to Israel, and he said to them, set your hearts unto all the words which I testify among you this day. In other words, this long song here, chapter 32, is a strong warning about idolatry, about warning against going against God, and of course, what he would do. So this doesn't sound like a song of Moses that we're going to sing as resurrected saints. I think probably the one in Exodus is a better choice. But this is a song of Moses, and the song of Moses that's prophetic and also describes in advance the entire history as the people of Israel. Now let's go to Hannah, 1 Samuel chapter 2 and verse 1. 1 Samuel chapter 2 and verse 1. So pop quiz. How many women in the Bible gave birth to, let's just say, supernatural or God-inspired answer to prayer children? 7. My wife knows. She probably studied all that. So 1 Samuel chapter 2 and verse 1, we have Hannah, who was barren. And she then, of course, was praying that God would open her womb and she would have children. You don't find one pregnant woman in the Bible who's upset about it, but you find 7 who are not able to have children, and they're very upset about it. Chapter 2 and verse 1, Hannah prayed and said, my heart rejoices in the Lord. My horn is exalted in the Lord. My mouth is enlarged over my enemies because I rejoice in your salvation. So this is after she's had this baby. And the baby, of course, is named Samuel. Samuel said to him, she said, let's go back to chapter 1 verse 27. For this child I prayed, and the Lord has given me my petition, which I ask of him. Therefore I have lent him to the Lord. As long as he lives, shall he be lent to the Lord. And he worshiped, or he and she both worshiped the Lord there. So her song, these verses here in 1 Samuel chapter 2, basically 10 verses, are songs of thanksgiving, songs of rejoicing. And Hannah kept her part of the bargain. She gave Samuel at age 5 to be a servant in the temple. And then God, I believe, blessed her with 5 more children, 1 for each year. Verse 2, there is none holy as the Lord, for there is none besides you. There is any rock like our God. Talk no more so exceedingly proudly, let not arrogance come out of your mouth, for the Lord is a God of knowledge, and let him by him actions are weighed. She may be referring here to Eli's other wife who had children and maybe made fun of or pointed it out to Hannah. God must be cursing you because you're not having children, whatever it might be. Verse 4, the bows of the mighty men are broken, and they that stumbled are girded with strength. They that were full have hired out themselves for bread, and they that were hungry cease, so that the barren has borne 7, and she that has many children is waxed feeble. So she's celebrating. She doesn't have 7 children yet. She's just saying that she feels like she's had that many. The Lord kills and makes alive. He brings down to the grave and brings up. The Lord makes poor. He makes rich. He brings low and he lifts up. Very true. God does punish. God does bless. And of course, he answers to our prayers, and also in accordance with his will. What he does is not limited. Verse 8, he raises up the poor out of the dust and lifts up the beggar from the dunghill. So set them among princes to make them inherit the throne of glory. For the pillars of the earth are the Lord's, and he has set the world upon them. Now, the pillars of the earth been talked about quite a bit. Some think there is an astronomical aspect to this, of magnetic fields, maybe because of the sun, the planets, whatever it might be. The word pillars here simply means something narrow, a column, or a hilltop. So it could refer to something, a building foundation of some kind. Verse 9, he will keep the feet of his saints, and the wicked shall be silent in darkness. For strength shall no man prevail, or by strength shall no man prevail. So that's a lesson for everyone. By strength, we don't prevail spiritually against evil forces. It's by God's strength. Last verse in this song, the adversaries of the Lord shall be broken to pieces, but out of heaven shall he thunder upon them. The Lord shall judge the ends of the earth, and he shall give strength unto his king, and exalt the horn of his anointed. Now, wait a minute. This is not a song about a baby. It's not a song about thanking God for, her barrenness being gone, and now she has a child. And really, in verse 6, she's talking about God's greatness. He kills, he brings down, he makes alive, he makes the poor, raises them up. And then finally, he keeps the feet of his saints in verse 9. The wicked shall be in darkness, the adversaries of God broken to pieces. But then the last part of verse 10 sounds like the prophecy of Enoch, given to us in the book of Jude. Out of heaven he shall thunder upon them. The Lord shall judge the ends of the earth. And this, in fact, is a summary of what's called the everlasting gospel, the gospel that has been preached from the very beginning, that Jesus Christ is going to return with 10,000s and thousands of his saints and angels, and he shall judge the earth. He shall give strength unto the king, in other words, the one who returns, Jesus Christ, and he shall exalt the horn of his anointed. So God inspired Hannah here to give a prophetic psalm, a prophetic celebration song about what was going to happen in the future when Jesus Christ returns. Now, the next thing we want to look at, now Hannah's victory song, by the way, really has a lot of, I want to say end time applications to it, but personal applications also. Now, the next one we want to look at is in 2 Samuel chapter 22, and that is a song of David. If I'm not mistaken, this one is also one of the Psalms. 2 Samuel chapter 22. It's also in Psalm 18, very, very similar. So we have here one of David's last Psalms, in the sense that it's kind of one of his later ones, but it's also a song of thanksgiving for victory. We don't know when David said this. Verse 1 says, David spoke unto the Lord the words of this song in the day that the Lord had delivered him out of the hand of all of his enemies and out of the hand of Saul. So it would seem to be that maybe not long after he was made king in Hebron, this would have been because he served as king in Hebron 7 years before the 33 years in Jerusalem. So in that case, you would have basically about that time frame, about the age of 30 to 31 years old, when God finally gave David peace on all sides. It could be a little bit later than that, because there were some wars with some of the people across the Jordan and the Moabites and others and the Syrians that David had to fight after he became king. So maybe it was more like when he was 38 or something like that, a little bit later. It does say when God had delivered him out of the hand of all of his enemies and out of the hand of Saul. Now, this is 51 verses long, so we don't have enough time to read the entire psalm here. It might be certainly a valuable thing to study when you get a chance on your own. But he says here, the Lord is my rock and my fortress and my deliverer. So he starts out by showing that God is the one who delivered, and that 12 things that God is to his people. And he lists all these things that God is. He's a rock, he's a fortress, he's a deliverer. The next verse says he's his shield, he's the horn of salvation, he's the high tower, he's a refuge, he's a savior, saved from violence. So he gives God a lot of titles here, and he's describing how God had saved him during this time of all of his enemies. Verse 4, I will call on the Lord who is worthy to be praised, so that I shall be saved from my enemies. And of course, we all have enemies. We have spiritual enemies. We have challenges from Satan and society and our own lusts and desires. So we have enemies that we have to be delivered from. He says, verse 5, when the waves of death compassed me, the floods of ungodly men made me afraid. So he remembers almost dying, remembers being in fear of death, the floods of ungodly men coming after him. The sorrows of the grave compassed me about, and the snares of death prevented me. So he felt like he was at the point of death in one of these struggles or battles. We don't know exactly which one he's referring to. In my distress, I called upon the Lord and cried to my God. He did hear my voice out of his temple, and my cry did enter into his ears. So we don't know exactly. I mean, it's obviously somewhat allegorical. What he's saying is God heard what he said. Now, in verse 8, then we really get into some allegorical descriptions here. Some vivid descriptions, but not necessarily literal. The earth shook and trembled. The foundations of heaven moved and shook because he was wroth. Maybe there was an earthquake. Maybe there was some movement of the stars in heavens. Who knows? But certainly it was a dramatic deliverance of David. To him, it felt like an earthquake. Verse 9, there went up a smoke out of his nostrils, and fire out of his mouth devoured, and coals were kindled by it. So fire maybe came down from heaven, lightning. Obviously, allegorically, David's simply saying, well, just like it was out of his nostrils or his mouth. He bowed the heavens also and came down, and darkness was under his feet. He rode on a cherub and did fly, and he was seen upon the wings of the wind. Now, this really is a description partly of like the 7 last plagues and the heavenly signs. This may be more a prophecy than an historical account of what happened to David, because Jesus Christ God did not ride on a cherub across the sky that we have record of in David's time when he was fighting a battle of some kind. He wasn't seen upon the wings and that we have record of. It's possible, but that will happen because Christ said that every eye would see him coming from east to west when he returns. He made darkness, pavilions round about him, dark waters and thick clouds of the skies. Through the brightness before him were coals of fire kindled. So apparently there was heat. He's just talking about heat and fire starting around. He sent out arrows and scattered them, lightning and discomfited them. Perhaps there was an army chasing after him that was caught in a storm of lightning and water. He sent from above, he took me and drew me out of many waters. In this case, waters being like a type of enemy armies. But these are all descriptions of how David felt God delivered him. They, of course, may not have been quite as literal as David has them here, but in his mind, they certainly felt that way. Let's drop down in verse 22. I've kept the ways of the Lord. And of course, he's just kind of saying here why God delivered him. He talks about God's merciful character. Verse 26, you are my lamp, O Lord, and the Lord will lighten my darkness. For by thee I have run through a troop. By my God, I have leaped over the wall. So he gave God the credit for the battle that he had fought. So David's account here is one that he's kind of in detail about how the enemies were defeated, all the way to pretty much the end of the chapter. Verse 48 said, it is God that avenged me and that brings down the people under me and that brings me forth from my enemies. Now, in our own experience, sometimes our enemies can be a health challenge. It could be other issues that we face. But remembering that God is the one who avenges and that he brings me forth from my enemies can be very, very encouraging and a very, very positive thing to remember. Verse 50, therefore I will give thanks. I'm sorry, I wanted to mention the last part of verse 49. It says, you have delivered me from the violent man. So apparently referring to Saul or Absalom, but it also could refer simply to Satan, the violent one, but maybe he's going back referring to Saul, who was violent, because remember, Saul threw spears and pinned him to the wall and all this stuff and tried to kill him. So perhaps that's what he's then referring to. Therefore, I will give thanks unto you, O Lord, among the heathen. I will sing praises unto your name. So very, very, I think, descriptive chapter here about how God delivered David all through his life and from all of his enemies, and the various allegorical and story type ways that he uses to describe that are very, very colorful, and they're also very descriptive of God's power and how David felt about it. Now let's go over to the New Testament. Let's go to Revelation chapter 5, verses 8 to 10. I wanted to have this in here tonight because it needs to be explained correctly. People sometimes make the wrong conclusion about this chapter and what actually is being said and who's saying it. So Revelation chapter 5. I'm sure you've all kind of familiar with the chapter, but starts out with, I saw in the right hand of him that sat on the throne a book written with him and on the backside, sealed with 7 seals. So there's this book sealed with 7 seals that's written on the inside and on the outside. Both sides of this scroll contain writing. And I saw a strong angel proclaiming with a loud voice, who is worthy to open the book and to loose the seals thereof? And no man in heaven or on earth, neither on the earth, was able to open the book or to look thereon. So nobody's able to open the book, obviously, except the Lamb of God, who has the power to open the book and to read and understand what it means. So one of the elders said to me, weep not, behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, has prevailed to open the book. So he prevailed by being able to prevail over Satan the devil. Now that may be it, but he then will reveal what is on this scroll, or what some of these 7, and of course these seals are beginning with the 27 events we sometimes talk about in the book of Revelation, the seals and the plagues and the other items that take place. Verse 6, I beheld, and lo, in the midst and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God sent forth into all the earth. So one of a place where a number of 7s are mentioned. 7's about, in this case, 7 horns, or 7 perhaps ruling over 7 church eras. 7 eyes where he sees the 7 eras and the churches and what's going on. The 7 spirits of God sent forth into all the earth. It could be several applications of that. We'll just have to someday have that completely explained to us. But he came and took the book out of the right hand of him that sat upon the throne. When he'd taken the book, the 4 beasts and the 24 and 20 elders fell down before the Lamb, having every one of them and golden vials full of odors, which are the prayers of the saints. So here we have these prayers of the saints that are also pictured later as being the incense smoke that is being burnt out of the incense altar in front of God's throne. So this is about a song, harps, and the prayers that are symbolized here by golden vials full of odors or incense that represents the prayers of God's people. And notice they sang a new song. So who's singing here? It isn't the odors, it isn't the harps. Who is singing are the 24 elders who sit around the throne of God. And they sing this song, and they are singing the song not about themselves, but about the people who are going to be resurrected. They are singing it as if they were these people who are going to be resurrected and ruling the earth. So they, the elders, sang a new song, saying, "You are worthy to take the book and to open the seals thereof, for you were slain and have redeemed us to God by your blood out of every kindred and tongue and people and nation." So that is the song of the redeemed, and it is sung by the 24 elders. This is not the 24 elders who are redeemed out of the earth. 24 elders were never on the earth. Those who were redeemed out of the earth were those who lived on the earth and who had to be forgiven of their sins by the blood of Jesus Christ. And they come from every kindred and tongue and people. And so they are singing a song that is really the song of the saints, you might say, the song of the resurrected saints. And he's made us unto our God kings and priests, and we shall reign on the earth. 24 elders are not going to reign on the earth. The resurrected saints are. So this is a song about the resurrected saints, or a song that the resurrected saints will sing. But in this case, it's being sung for us by these 24 elders, because it is, again, a prophetic announcement about what is going to happen. So it is a celebration song, and it is a song that I would think every resurrected saint will sing, and that they'll sing a new song saying, Jesus Christ is worthy to take the book and to open the seals. By his blood, we've all been saved, and now we're going to be kings and priests and reign on the earth. And finally, let's go to Revelation chapter 15. So the song of the redeemed is in Revelation 5. In Revelation 15, this is called the Song of the Tribulation Saints. The Song of the Tribulation Saints. Chapter 15, and let's begin in verse 1. The song itself is in verses 3 through 4. So Revelation 15 and verse 1, I saw another sign in heaven, great and marvelous, 7 angels having the 7 last plagues, for in them is filled up the wrath of God. So this is the time when God's people are being protected. God is not going to send his wrath to punish his true faithful followers. They are instead in a place of protection during this 3.5-year period. And I saw, as it were, a sea of glass mingled with fire. That would be symbolic of the glory of God, the shining presence of God below his throne. And them that had gotten the victory over the beast and over his image and over his mark and over the number of his name, they stand on the sea of glass having the harps of God. The harps accompany song. Now, if they've gotten victory over the beast, does that mean they lived during this last period in history when the beast power is on? Or perhaps one of the other beasts? Remember, there are 7 beasts, 10 resurrections of the Roman Empire, 4 great beasts, the last one having 10 resurrections and 7 heads. So we have this group of people that are resurrected. They're standing on the glory of God. They're on the sea of glass that's in front of the throne. They've overcome the beast. They've overcome his image, overcome his mark. And they are then standing before the sea of glass, or standing on the sea of glass, or the shining presence of God's glory below his throne. And they have harps of God. In other words, they're getting ready to sing. They sing the song of Moses, the servant of God. Now, very likely it's going to be some kind of a copy, not the exact words, but it might be the exact words, who knows, of the Song of Moses that was one of triumph over Pharaoh and his enemies, because Satan is certainly pictured by Pharaoh. Pharaoh had a satanic attitude of resistance against God. And so the Song of Moses was one of this great deliverance of God. We read that in Exodus 15, supernatural deliverance by God of his people. So they sing the Song of Moses, the servant of God, and the Song of the Lamb. Now, it's a song of triumph. And these are the words of the Song of the Lamb that are now sung by those who are, this is called here the Song of the Tribulation Saints. It could be the Song of all the saints down through history. So the Song of the Lamb is this: great and marvelous are your works, Lord God Almighty. Just and true are your ways, you King of saints. Who shall not fear you, O Lord, and glorify your name? For you are only are holy, for all nations shall come and worship before you, for your judgments are made manifest. So those two verses then could correctly be called the Song of the Lamb, the song about the Lamb that is sung by these resurrected saints, or these resurrected people who have been saved out of all the years of tribulation. So it's great and marvelous are your works, Lord God Almighty. Just and true are your ways, you King of saints. So it's obviously about the Messiah. Who shall not fear you, O Lord, and glorify your name? Of course, the answer is nobody. The entire earth is going to fear God and glorify his name. For you alone are holy, all nations shall come and worship before you, for your judgments are made manifest. So in other words, the events here in the book of Revelation are the obvious manifest agents or made obvious judgments of God, and what he's done is true and righteous. So those are the 8 songs in the Bible that are not in the book of Psalms. The 8 songs, you might say, of praise or thanking God for deliverance. And in each one of them, there's a lesson for us as we face challenges and trials that no doubt will get more heated, more challenging as this next year comes. I've heard people say, it won't be great when 2020 is over. The answer is 2021 might not be any better. It might be worse. So there's the old saying, be careful what you ask for because you actually might get it. But no matter what happens, we do have these very encouraging and wonderfully beautiful descriptions of God's deliverance to his people as long as they remain faithful. So that's our Bible study for tonight. I hope you've enjoyed it, and we will continue on then next week.